I have two questions. First, are you going to write a book so that this information can be absorbed? It's really difficult to get it all. And my second question goes back to something you said about AIDS in the first part of your talk, where you mentioned, as did Desmond Tutu, when he was asked about the cause of AIDS, he said it's not really this particular virus, it's poverty and it's these other diseases. And then he was ultimately shot down by so-called proof that there was this particular drug that would fight the virus. And now that drug is being administered in South Africa. So those are my two questions.
What was the question in the second part?
Well, what really, you seem to agree with Desmond Tutu about that.
I don't agree with Desmond Tutu about anything, I don't think.
Oh.
But I will say that if he said that, then I agree with that statement, perhaps. But Desmond Tutu has objectives, has interests. So I don't align myself with Desmond Tutu.
He was barring this
But I know the story to some degree, so I'll answer your question without trying. I don't mean to be offending you. Pass the mic to someone else. But the answer to that question is Desmond Tutu did raise a very good point, which had some truth and some issues that needed to be addressed. And then, of course, he was hammered down by the system because you just can't challenge the system at that level if you're Desmond Tutu. Why do I say I don't align myself with Desmond Tutu? I also don't align myself with Nelson Mandela, who went on to, serve the interests of Cecil Rhodes' family in South Africa against the Congolese people. Nelson Mandela went about making some deals for the big mining companies in the Congo later. And so that brings up the whole question of, was there any end to apartheid in South Africa, which raises the question of what can we do about the Congo, which raises the question of how there are powerful forces at work in the United States to silence this narrative and make sure that those who are working for Congo are shown to be either, in other words, there are people whose stories about Congo are promoted, or organizations that are promoted because they're not getting to the root of the story. And then there are organizations that are telling the true story that are covered up, and those are the ones that need to be supported. That's exactly what happened with the apartheid movement. It was infiltrated and controlled at a certain level. And back to your question about AIDS, somebody should do some work about this, because there are so many questions that remain unanswered about the AIDS sector, Bill Clinton's connection to his AIDS philanthropy, billions and billions of dollars pumping into Rwanda and Uganda and Congo through Clinton's philanthropy, so-called philanthropy, which is basically guilt money. His connection to Paul Farmer, for example. Paul Farmer, anybody not know who Paul Farmer is? Paul Farmer published a book which is fantastic. When I read it, I thought it was as good as Manufacturing Consent by Noam Chomsky. I'm like, this is a fantastic book, and it is. It's Pathologies of Power by Paul Farmer, based on his work as a doctor in Haiti and in Russia, dealing with tuberculosis, not AIDS. So it raises the question of tuberculosis. But then Paul Farmer goes on, accepts all this money from Bill Clinton, and suddenly he's Clinton's envoy in Haiti after the earthquake, and also working with Paul Kagame in Rwanda, and building a house in Rwanda. Now, whose land is he building a house on? Because what happened in Rwanda was the Hutus were forced out, and when they left, Tutsis from outside flooded in, killed off Tutsis who were in the country. That's where the genocide came from. And also the people fighting back. And the Hutus who came back found that their land and their families, their houses had been taken. So where did Paul Farmer get this land? Where is he getting his money? What is Paul Farmer's connection? Anyway, there are huge questions that need to be addressed here about the AIDS sector in Africa. And the bottom line is, I mean, it's as simple as saying and admitting that the pharmaceutical companies test drugs in Africa they would never test on people in the United States. Like the Tuskegee experiment in the United States that was such a huge crime eventually. That's exactly what happens in Africa. But all these arguments are presented by Nicholas Kristof for the New York Times, who says that we need to be able to, the Africans want it. They're going to be dying of AIDS anyway. They'd like to try the drug out. They're not properly informed. Informed consent is one thing, but that's not what's going on. It's testing of pharmaceutical products. Anyway, the bottom line is it needs to be addressed. And I can't seem to find the resources to sit down and write a book.
Can you illuminate us from your perspective on the Shabaab in Somalia? Would you say there could potentially be a stabilizing force, particularly since they've taken on the Ethiopians and they've taken on try to assassinate, I think, the president of Uganda? Do you think they're just being vilified by the Western media?
I don't support terrorism, so I don't support the American military presence in Somalia. or the Ethiopian presence in Somalia. The United
But
States
I'm asking you about the Shabab.
I'm getting there. The United States has a base in Ethiopia in which they have several big bases in Ethiopia in which they launched the invasion of first of all, they've got genocide going on against 4 or 5 main groups in Ethiopia: the Oromo, the Omo people, the Oromo people, the OLF is the Oromo Liberation Front. Yeah, the Oromo, the Omo, and the Anuak people, and the Ogaden Basin, where they marched across the Ogaden, killing all these people as they invaded Somalia, whenever that was, just a few years ago. The Somali real power structure in Somalia is Islamic, and they're a people's government. They've always been a people's government. They have terrorist tactics, which nobody wants to support, but they're also defending their own country. Do I think that the Islamic movement in Somalia, the power structure, and the Shabab has some legitimacy in their actions? It's like asking me if I thought Geronimo had a right to fight against the cavalry. Can they take over? Do they deserve to run Somalia? We don't deserve to run it. I don't know how to answer your question on a certain level. As long as we understand that the American military presence, the covert operations, snatch and grab operations are going in from Kenya, from Ethiopia, from Djibouti. They're sending UAVs out there. All these so-called pirates in Somalia began as fishermen. We're dumping nuclear waste in the water off the ocean. The whole shipping issue off the coast there. For example, we're told about pirates, Somali pirates, but we're not told that Israel shipped in all these weapons on a big ship that the pirates captured. They held it ransom for 4 months, the MV Maivana or something like that, about 2 years ago. They held it ransom. The Pentagon got involved. The pirates got away with $1 million in their little boat. They took off. The Israeli ship docked at Mombasa, Kenya, which is the American military port in Kenya, and the weaponry offloaded, drove across Kenya and into South Sudan and on its way to Darfur. So it's a very complicated narrative. Other than that, the guy to talk about Somalia would be Michael Marin, who wrote the book The Road to Hell. Or if you want to fund me, I'd love to go there. So I can't really get into it any more detail than that. So I hope that I didn't offend you and I answered your question. Well, there's 2,000 Ugandan UPD. I think so. It's like, yeah. I don't support terrorist methods, but I'm not going to say that somebody can't fight against the UPDF. They've sent 2,000 Ugandans trained by covert operation forces in Uganda out of Entebbe and out of the U.S. military secret bases in the Rwenzori Mountains. Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of popular support, and there's a lot of popular support for the Shabab. I do think so, yeah. But I'm really not the guy to answer the question about Somalia any further than I have. Just that it's a really twisted story. And if there's a people that have been abandoned by the world, it's the Somali people.
Keith, my question is close to that. You alluded to the support that Ethiopia and Somalia gave to RPF back in 1990. And I'm wondering about continuity in terms of the people involved and the strategic aims and so on. The continuity between that support they gave to the RPF in 1990 and Museveni's troops serving essentially as American mercenaries in Somalia right now. Could you kind of elaborate?
Since I think the answer to your question, if this isn't it, then ask your question again afterwards. But the answer to your question is it's only gotten worse. The RPF power, Rwanda has become a base, American military base. It's a tiny little, why would we want a little country like Rwanda? We took Uganda, basically Britain, the United States, and Israel took Uganda, marched into Rwanda, got rid of the French, created this mountainous little, beautiful mountainous little high elevation country, fantastically, wonderfully beautiful country, turned it into an American military protectorate where we can then launch the war into Congo. And from Uganda and Rwanda, we're sending military into Darfur who have committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Congo, and now they've exported that to Darfur and to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Right.
And so everything has expanded. Museveni's gotten more money, more troops have been trained, less and less attention to the atrocities, and they're still plundering the Congo at the rate of 1,500 people dying a day in eastern Congo.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm trying to get a little more fine-grained. In other words, were the same people and movements or organizations involved in the support they gave in 1990 involved in the Somalia situation today?
Oh, in Somalia.
Are we trying to support them by sending the Somalian troops in there?
Well, as I said, Somalia is really not something I should be speaking about. It's very convoluted because you've got Eritrea involved, you've got Sudan involved, you got all kinds of backing to the different factions in Somalia. You got UPDF and working in there. Some of the same players that organized the overthrow of the Rwanda government in 1990 are active on the continent today. And this would be Roger Winter, who has a special office in Washington, D.C. He doesn't answer to anybody. This guy is one of our top military operatives working on the subject of overthrowing the Bashir government in Sudan. And we do that easily these days because they're Islamic. We don't even have to say anything more. They're Islamic government. Don't you think we should get rid of them? Why not? It's just like the Hutus have been demonized, so has Islamicism everywhere. So who actually is backing the war in Somalia? Chevron. The oil companies that had those big concessions in the 1980s that they lost and then were fighting for what we were fighting for in 1993. We went into Somalia because of oil. You look at the oil map in Somalia and all these big oil companies. Halliburton has some big interests there. What's that big one out of Texas that's another really big oil company that is a really powerful company that's never mentioned much in the press? No. What? What? No. I can't think of it. But anyway, there are definitely powerful corporate interests behind what's going on in Somalia, just like there were behind Rwanda. Now, is Shell, for example, who backed Kagame, are they also involved in Somalia? It's hard to imagine they're not, but I can't answer it on that level.
And if you take a bird's eye view and don't restrict yourself to Africa, just a few short miles over the water there, you've got Yemen, so that connects right directly.